did Uncle Scar get his name?
Oh, like in The Lion King?
Yeah. Is his given name Scar?
No, I think it's once he got the scar.
Well, that's what I'm asking, because
Yeah.
unless he was born, he was scarred during birth, and then they're like, oh, we'll name him Scar because he has this scar.
I don't think so.
Is his real name like Robert?
Yeah.
Uncle Robert?
Uncle Robert.
Then it seems kind of disrespectful for little Simba to be calling him Scar.
True.
Or does everyone just call him that?
I
He
think
thinks it's cool.
everyone just calls him that because he chose like the evil life. So he's like, I gotta have like a cool evil name.
I feel like he was thrust into the evil life if everyone's already calling him Scar. He's like, I got this, Scar, saving a busload of nuns. And now all you call me Scar? Yeah, I have no choice but to be bad.
I also think it could be like he's like, oh yeah, I want to be Scar because like chicks dig scars.
They don't.
No,
From my understanding. You tell me.
But I mean, like that's like
Because he's a tough guy.
the commonly said thing. Yeah, is that like girls really like scars?
I think that's just something you tell people with the scar to make them feel better about being, disfigured, and they're going to have the stigma, and then they're going to be just called, hey, Scar.
Yeah.
Oh, no wonder he's so angry. And even then, his plan was like, oh, I want to feed everyone equally. That's not the worst. But he did kill his brother, so there you go.
True.
Oh, spoiler alerts from The Lion King.
What?
But we're not talking about The Lion King. We are going to be talking all about the 1967 classic film, In the Heat of the Night. So welcome everyone to another episode of I Love This, You Should Too. My name is Indy, Uncle Scar Randhawa. Although I don't really have any scars.
No.
I don't scar. I don't scar and I don't bruise.
Brag.
But it's bad because what I do get, if you don't have those things, you do get blood clots.
True, yes.
And I'm going for a surgical consult next week.
And we are a blood clot household.
Wow.
It's bad news.
And that is my lovely co-host, Samantha Blood Clot Randhawa.
Blood clot lungs.
Blood clot is can be used as almost a swear.
True, yeah.
We should start using that.
Pulmonary embolism sounds cooler, though.
What the pulmonary embolism? I'm not going to try a Jamaican accent, especially with that word. But
we're going to talk about a movie that has no blood clots.
I didn't think we would spend so much time on blood clots. But anyways, this was my pick for Black History Month, and I think it's going to be pretty clear why I chose this movie. But it was my pick, something I had seen before and really liked. But Samantha, this is your first watch. What are your first impressions on In the Heat of the Night?
I liked it.
Give me a little more.
I liked it. It was not what I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, but and I thought it had too much gum chewing and too much racism.
Okay. Gum chewing we can get to later, but too much racism. Could you give me another?
Like too many racist people. And I understand that this is like a depiction of what the South, they're in the South, right?
Yes.
Yes. I figured because there's like
Mississippi.
Cotton plantation. I understand that this is like a snapshot. And I understand that this is like a movie, I think, that you're supposed to feel uncomfortable about it. Mm-hmm. So I think that they did a good job with that.
So your criticism is about that racism existed?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh, okay.
But I really kind of enjoyed the messaging, I guess.
I would have expected there to be more racism in this movie. I think if there is a black cop in Mississippi, small town Mississippi, in 67, I think there's going to be more N-words dropped than there was in this movie.
Totally. And that was hard, I guess, because we come from a time where you don't say the N-word. And it's like there's a few words in the English language that like I wince when they say it.
What are the other ones? Please say them now.
No, I don't want to say that.
List them all, starting with the one you were just referring to.
No, I'm not saying them out loud.
I have a little bit of a different background. I've been like I grew up being called that because people don't know, like,
Right.
You're one of the other.
You're not white, so
you're
you
one of the
must
darkies.
be, yeah.
So I remember, like, I had to ask my sister when I was 6 what it meant, because that was the first time I was called that.
Oh my God.
In a soccer game when I was 6 years old. And then also, like, growing up, so many of my friends used that word. In the sense that they were black and would call each other that, and then would call me that, and I'd be like, I'm not calling you that back because I feel like that's not cool.
It's not my place.
But yeah, so it was. I of course wince when I hear it used
wrong.
I guess is there a right way?
I mean, like,
as an epithet.
Yeah, of course.
But the existence of it is something that I don't want to say more comfortable with, but I have more experience. And then I also watch a lot of older movies.
Yes.
And I also watch a lot more movies that deal explicitly with race relations, and then it's going to come up a lot more.
So I think I exist in a world, or the media that I consume and that kind of thing. There's not a lot of use of that word.
Right.
Except for maybe in like popular music. I think hearing words like the N-word it's still shocking to me because
as it should,
grew up knowing we just don't say that word. That's not a word that we use. And so was a hard thing for me to hear as much as it was in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I found really interesting, and this is like my kind of overall thought about the movie, was it's really interesting to see a time in the US where like slavery is over, and it's like peak Klan time, I assume.
Well, this is past Klan time,
but I mean,
sure.
like, it's still there.
It exists.
It's a little more under the radar, but it's still there.
I've seen a KKK rally in my life, so
yes, yeah, like it's not gone for sure.
Idaho, looking at you, you'd think Idaho is fucked up. You wouldn't think it is because it's like, oh, it's like, northwest. We're not... Yeah. No, it's fucked up over
potatoes. Oh wow, yeah. It was really interesting to see a time where in a more metropolitan place like Philadelphia, where Mr. Tibbs is from, that he is like a renowned homicide detective, and he's got this career where he makes good money and he's like respected in his field. And then to go somewhere that he can travel to by train, like it's not like he's going to a completely different country, to see how differently he's handled by the people there. And I just think that's a really interesting juxtaposition, and one that is not mentioned in current media as much as I think it still exists.
Yeah, definitely, because even where we are, I am a somewhat respected person.
You are.
But I drive 2 hours out of town and they're dropping that N-word. I've been told to go back where I come, although I get told that in the city as well. But
you got told that in the parking lot of the hospital you were born in.
In the parking lot in the hospital where I was born. I was told to go back where I came from. But small towns here are scary to me. And we go through them and you're like, oh, let's stop here. And I'm sometimes like, oh, I don't know about this. Because it's a little different. Well, let's get into a little bit of context for this movie.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this movie is one we're going to break down on a semiotics level a little less. It's not really about symbolism and hidden meanings.
Right.
I feel like this movie is telling you what it thinks. It's putting it right there on the surface. We'll probably talk less about the formal aspects of this than some of the other movies I choose, because it's mostly going to be about the thematic elements and this movie's place in history. Because I chose this not just because I do think it is a very good movie still, but its place in history overshadows what is actually on the screen in a lot of ways. So this comes out in 1967, and for the Americans, the Vietnam War is going on. Martin Luther King Jr. is still alive. Malcolm X had been assassinated 2 years prior, and interracial marriage had been deemed constitutional just that year.
That this came out.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So those things we like to think of as, a lot of us like to think of that it's like the far past,
right.
But it's not that far.
It's not that far.
And there were so many movies about the Vietnam War that were being made when the war was still going on and in the short time right after. Mm-hmm. But with the civil rights movement, there are very few movies that were made contemporaneously, that are being made during the civil rights movement.
Right.
We didn't get a lot of those movies until like 30, 40, 50 years later is when we start seeing that appear in cinema a lot more. And this is one of those few examples where it is addressing things at the time.
Right.
And we can't really talk about the context of this movie's place in history without Sidney Poitier's place in history as well. So in 1967, he had done 3 groundbreaking movies that all came out the same year, To Sir with Love, In the Heat of the Night, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And In the Heat of the Night and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner are especially successful in critical response and as far as the Oscars go, because those 2 movies got so many nominations, everyone except for him. It's one of those instances. So he did win an Oscar. He was the first black man to win Best Actor, and that was in 1964 for Lilies in the Field. But also A Raisin in the Sun, I think, is some of his best work. The Defiant Ones. He had been making big movies since the late 50s, and he was working as early as like 49, 50. And he has a really interesting biography that I'm not going to get into, but he was from the Bahamas. He was a child of farmers. He was born by mistake in the US while they were like on a tomato shipment. He just happened to be born in the United States. He didn't learn to read until I think he was a teenager. He speaks this very odd or like affected way. The way he speaks is because he learned to get rid of his Bahamanian. Is that what you are from? If you're from the Bahamas?
Bohemian?
Bohemian is different. That's actually from the Czech Republic.
Oh. No, Bohemian?
Maybe.
That's Either what I don't know.
He worked to lose his Bahamas accent by mimicking TV news anchors. So that's how he has this very like kind of erudite, non-regional, and very formal way of speaking.
Yeah,
right?
actually, newscaster is a good way to describe the way that he speaks.
Yeah, so he's like watching Walter Cronkite, and that's how he learns to speak in an American way.
And the way he speaks is very like even toned.
Yes,
there's not a lot of emotion in it, like a newscaster.
And in this movie, because you've probably never seen anything with him, at least that you know of.
I don't think so.
So this one is a little unique in his filmography. I talk about Jackie Robinson on this podcast a lot because it comes up a lot. But if you don't know, he was the first black man in the major leagues of baseball. And he was chosen not because he was the best black player, although he was one of the best baseball players ever still, but because he was someone that they deemed as palatable to white audiences. He had been in the military. He spoke in this very articulate way. And there's this joke on the show The League, which is a very like silly show. They have this really interesting take on how they talk about baseball players in the media. Like if you say like, oh, he's real articulate, that's something that they'd always say for black players.
Right.
And if you say like, oh yeah, he's a real firecracker, that's something you'd say for the Latin American players. Like, oh yeah, he's a real gym rat. That's what they'd say about like white players because they're thought of as being less like athletic.
Right.
So if you're saying, oh yeah, he's a gym rat, but you're all just saying the same thing, but that's how you'd say it for each one of those races.
Right.
Which is really interesting. So Jackie Robinson was that kind of guy because he had to be perfect. He had to be someone who could turn the other cheek. And Sidney Poitier, a lot of people would say like he was not the best black actor of that time, but he had this perfect elocution. He dressed sharp and he was seen as like not threatening to white Hollywood. So he was more palatable because of that. But because of that, then people start saying like, oh, that's all you can do. You are playing to white audiences and not black audiences. You're a sellout. You're inauthentic. And that's the double-edged sword of being a minority in so many things. Like you have to be all things to all people, while a white actor can just be like, yeah, I'm an actor. I do this movie, whatever. I'm an actor. Sidney Poitier doesn't have that benefit of doubt, right? He has to be representative of an entire people. So he gets these roles where he always has to be the ideal man. Like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, that comes out the same year, where all 4 lead actors are nominated for Best Actor or Best Supporting, except for him.
Oh.
And he is playing that very perfect man in that movie because that's all he could get cast as, because he is kind of the working leading man that is black in Hollywood. It's pretty much just him.
Wow.
So he has to be perfect in every role, and he's cast as these flawless characters. And I think that's part of why he's not nominated in these movies. I'm sure there's probably something to do with racism. Like, the Oscars are just super racist. They're super sexist. That's just how they are. They're also trash. I don't care about them. They're dumb. But they are a good indication of how people were feeling at the time. And I think he doesn't get the respect as an actor because he doesn't do as much in this movie as Rod Steiger, who wins Best Actor. His counterpart in this, he's not a sheriff, he's the chief? Yeah, so he ends up winning Best Actor. Poitier is not nominated. And you can put on your context-free glasses and be like, I see the argument for that. Poitier doesn't have to do as much as Steiger does. But it's also that Poitier is pigeonholed into playing these perfect characters, and they don't have the ability to have a full range of emotion.
Right.
I do think that this is a movie where he's almost addressing some of that, and he gets the opportunity to break free from some of that. Mm-hmm. Not all the way, because he is still like immaculately dressed.
Yeah.
He is still very calm under all the pressure and all of the terrible things that are done to him. But he gets those moments to break out of that, which he did not get the opportunity to do earlier in his career. Mm-hmm. Like the slap. He slaps back.
Right.
That is not something that he was allowed to do earlier. He has that one kind of break, a little bit of a tirade where he's just like, I'm going to get that fat cat and I'm going to bring him down. Mm-hmm. That's not something he was ever allowed to do before. So these breaks in character in this kind of persona that Poitier had created are huge. It's hard to get that watching it now because we're just like, yeah, of course he'd slap him back. Why not? That man slapped him. But that was revolutionary, not just because a black man is slapping a white man, but also in this history of Poitier's own career that he's finally getting a chance to break away.
Right.
This movie was so important and groundbreaking in a lot of ways that we can't always appreciate coming at it from 2024.
Right.
But then there's all those moments where you're like, wow, it's still the same.
Yeah.
And that's always hard. Do you want to hear a little bit about the production of this movie too?
I do.
I feel like I'm just monologuing,
no,
but I feel
love
like
it. This is kind
context,
of a monologue movie.
Context is important in this movie, more so than in most movies we watch.
True.
So this film is set in a fictional town of Sparta, Mississippi, but they filmed in Sparta, Illinois, because Poitier would not go south of the Mason-Dixon line because earlier that year or the year before, he was hanging out with his buddy Harry Belafonte, and they were just straight up attacked by the Klan.
By the Klan?
Yeah, so he's like, yeah, I don't go to the south anymore because when I go there, people try to kill me.
Right.
And just to think of that as being a part of the production of this movie, because now we hear like, oh, Leonardo DiCaprio, he ate raw meat in that movie and he's a vegetarian. What a sacrifice for his craft. Do you see that guy? He lost all this weight. What an amazing actor. What dedication. Meanwhile, Poitier's doing movies where he sleeps with a gun under his pillow every night because he thinks there's a good chance he'll be killed because people tend to kill him when he goes there.
Right.
So they shoot in Illinois because that's one of the places where they're actually allowed to stay in the same hotel.
Oh.
With like the cast and crew, black and white. That wasn't the case everywhere. And they changed the name of the city in the movie to Sparta because they can't CG out the name Sparta off like the water tower and everything. Oh. So let's just say let's just say it's Sparta, Mississippi now.
Right.
But then they do have to shoot a little bit further south. They won't go to Mississippi, but they do go to, I think it's Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And they shoot the cotton field and plantation stuff there because they needed cotton fields. Yeah. So they go to Tennessee, and that is where Poitier sleeps with a gun under his pillow every night because the last time he went south of the Mason-Dixon line, the Klan accosted him and tried to kill him.
Wow. That's wild that a Hollywood actor, like someone
who's already won a Best Actor award.
Yeah, like that someone like a big name like that is having to deal with stuff like that.
He could be like in the top 5 most recognizable black men in the United States at that time. Like after Martin Luther King, Muhammad Ali, probably some other athletes are up there as well. But Not that many. Poitier is
True.
one of the most famous black men in all of America, and he still has to deal with this because
I just think about, like, we were talking about Interview with the Vampire and how they had them, like, in tunnels and, like hidden away from the public, and how movies these days film and you don't even know who's in the movie or what the costumes look like or what's happening with them, and that studios wouldn't do everything that they could to, like, protect their talent like that.
but they're part of the system,
Yeah.
right? It's not like,
Absolutely.
hey, we're employing this black man because we believe in a race-free America.
True, yes.
I don't think that's the case. It's still a large company in America in the 60s.
Yeah.
Although United Artists, I hear good things of them back then. I don't really know, though, so I'm not going to speculate. They almost didn't release this movie in the southern states because they thought there would be too much of an uproar, but they
Oh.
eventually did, although it was banned in South Africa and not released there.
Oh, do you know why?
Why?
Yeah.
Because it's South Africa, apartheid.
Oh, yeah.
That was going on.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, you're right. I forgot.
Yeah. So what do you want to talk about first? Do you want to start off with just talking about Mr. Tibbs and that performance and that character?
Sure. Mr. Tibbs.
Yeah, because I feel like calling him Virgil when he says specifically, like,
They call me Mr. Tibbs. I thought his performance was really good. I thought he did a really good job of kind of balancing the, like, racial parts of this movie as well as being the smartest person in the room basically the entire movie. And I think I really liked his approach to how, like, multifaceted this character is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there's a lot of things happening under the surface for a character that probably has some of the fewest lines for, like, in the main characters. And I feel like he did a really good job of creating this kind of stoic, mysterious character, and keeping that up throughout the entire film.
Yeah, really, it's right upon his introduction. He has so much power within his silence. Mm-hmm. And early on, you can see anger underneath it. Like that one scene where he's, the first time we see him, where he's being arrested and he's just silent. Yeah. And we get this shot of his face and you could see seething anger, which is something we hadn't seen in his roles, at least in the roles of that I had seen of his. He's just always like happy and like doing his best to help everyone, just like a good guy and the perfect man all the time. And here we get to see that in that silence, I can get that this is a man who is frustrated and has this simmering anger underneath. And this is also a man who has dealt with this before. Yes. This is not the first time this has happened to him.
Yeah, he knows how to deal with the situation and he doesn't seem surprised.
No, not at all.
And I feel like when he explains that he was visiting his mom and he was just like changing trains and there was a 4-hour layover or whatever. And so he had to like wait. And you can tell that he's rehearsed what he was going to say. I'm sure he was doing that in the drive over to the station and like.
Or that's just the way he has learned that he must present himself.
Exactly.
Which is kind of like an interesting mirror to Poitier himself, that he must present himself this way to work in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Similarly, Tibbs must present himself in this very even, measured, controlled way.
Yeah.
Because he knows he's like 2 steps away from getting shot.
Yes. And a lot of places, they say in the movie, a lot of places wouldn't have stopped to talk to you.
Yeah.
You just would have been shot. Like, that's the thing. So I really liked his kind of calm under pressure, but you can see that like resentment and anger like boiling under the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really like good performance from him to be able to portray both of those.
I also love the few times we get to see him kind of break his facade a little bit. I love the part where he buddies up with that one criminal in the jail cell.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm your friend, come on. And you know that's just him being a good cop.
Yeah.
That's him being a good detective. He knows that this guy has some information I want. I'm not going to be able to bully it out of him. This is what's going to work for this guy right now. He needs help. I am here and I can give him that help.
Yeah.
So, and that's how he's able to get the information from him. I liked his, his buddy speech there. There's one scene very early on that I think is a great example of so much of this. When he is in the coroner's office and he is going to, he starts examining the body. At this point, he already has some, I don't know if it's respect, but a little bit of trust from Rod Steiger, who's, I forget the character's name now, Gillespie. He has some begrudging respect maybe from Gillespie, at least that he knows what he's talking about. And he goes in there and he instantly sets himself up as an expert. And he has all this technical talk that he uses, I think, very deliberately, because he's showing, like, I know what I'm talking about, and I know talking like this is going to show all of them that I know what I'm talking about. But then he always says, like, oh, well, the best case is for this, right? And the other coroner is like, oh, yes, yeah, of course. So he knows that, like, I'm not going to come here and show them all up and say, like, you don't know anything, you backwoods hicks. Like, let me take care of this. He's going to show them in those, like, 20 seconds that I know what I'm talking about, but also I am, like, here to be somewhat deferential to you as well, to show you some respect. I'm not here to say that I am better, when he clearly is. But then he says things to the chief, like, oh, well, the best way to determine time of death is from heat loss of the brain, right? And then the coroner's like, yeah, right. And then he goes like, wouldn't you say so, chief? Knowing that the chief doesn't know.
Chief doesn't know.
So he's kind of getting in little digs where he can, but he's not going too far with it. He's still within that kind of measured way that he lives his life. And that scene, I think, is not much on the surface, but we get such a good setup for the rest of the movie very quickly, both in the arrest, the first scene he has with Steiger in the chief's office. Mm-hmm. And when he says, like, he shouts back the amount he makes in a week to him, that whole bit. Yeah. And the train that's going to come. And then, of course, right on cue, you hear the horn. I loved all of that back and forth between the two of them, because it's not setting the chief up as this crazy Southern racist.
No.
He is, of course, of that world. And yeah, I believe that that is a racist band, sure. But it's not some caricature of, like, these lazy, incompetent Southerners, which we would get in a lot of movies as well. It's playing so much of this, like, I wouldn't say middle of the road, because that makes it seem like they're not making strong choices, but they're giving nuance to everything. Mm-hmm. Nobody is all, I was going to say nothing is black and white, but that's...
It's literally black and white.
But in that coroner scene, I loved it because those other guys aren't overtly racist. But you get to see those things like, well, I'm not taking orders from this guy. And, like, nobody's going to take his coat. And when the chief pulls off a bit of the covering over the dead body, and then Tibbs comes and pulls off the whole thing and just hands it to the chief.
Yeah.
That is something that is small, but to audiences of the time, and even just us watching what has happened in the 10 minutes leading up to that, we know that's a big deal.
Yeah, because it's coming in second to this expert.
Yeah.
And
here, take this make yourself useful. Grab this. Grab this sheet.
Take this away.
And then we get those shots of his hands, of black hands handling a white body.
Yeah.
And that is something that also was revolutionary for the time. That's not something that you would see in film. And that's something that none of those men had ever seen before either. And then that scene ends with him saying, like, oh, where can I wash my hands? And I think maybe now the context of that is probably lost. Mm-hmm. But this is a time and place where black and white people didn't use the same bathroom.
Right.
They didn't wash their hands in the same place. And I'm willing to bet no black man had ever been in that room before. So the subtext there is, I am going to wash my hands where you wash your hands because I am equal, because I'm an expert.
Yes, yeah.
And it's such an efficient scene to set up so much of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you really get a lot of context out of the way in that scene.
Yeah.
And you get reminded, and I don't, this probably wasn't like the point in 1967 when this came out, but as a modern audience, as like a 2024 audience, you get reminded of a lot of things that you might not have remembered. Like black and white people didn't touch and things were segregated. And the idea that a black person would have more knowledge than a white person was just like unheard of. Like you would just never, ever assume that. And those were good things to remind the audience of in the first like 20 minutes of the film, I guess.
There's a similar scene that adds to what you were talking about when he tells Mrs. Colbert that her wife is dead. And he goes to kind of comfort her, I guess.
Yeah.
And she pulls away. And you're not sure, is this a black and white thing? Is this is a woman in grief? This is a woman in shock.
Just found out that her husband's dead.
And you're not sure. And I think I love that you're not sure. I think as her character progresses, we learn that it is probably the grief, but I don't know.
No.
And this is a time where just having a black man and a white woman alone in a room was something that you couldn't do.
Yeah. And in that scene, just to like jump on that, you get to see maybe the first time she moves away from him is like racial, and it's like under like she's not aware of what she's doing. It's just like ingrained. That's just how you act. And then you do kind of see her kind of clock it for a moment and then realize that like, and then it just becomes grief.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I read it.
Yeah.
Was that there was this moment of her being like, oh, and then being like, oh no, wait, this person is trying to help me. And like, I just need to like take a minute for my husband who is now dead. So yeah, I found there was like little nuanced moments like that were really interesting to see.
And we can still get that context, but at the time, we have to remember that this was less than a decade after the lynching of Emmett Till, who was murdered, was lynched because he talked to a white woman.
Right.
This is that world. And to have Mr. Tibbs come in there and grab her arm and sit her down was, it doesn't seem big to us now, but it was. It was a big deal. I guess we could go into the other big deal in the scene with the slap.
Yes, absolutely.
So the scene where he slaps Endicott was not in the novel. Oh, this was based on a novel.
Right, yes.
And according to Poitier, that the scene was almost not in the movie, but he said that, I have a little quote here. I'll tell you what, I'll make this movie for you if you give me your absolute guarantee. When he slaps me, I slap him right back. And you guarantee that it will play in every version of this movie. Oh, because he was already thinking like, well, in the South, they'll cut that part out or something. So he asked for that guarantee and it was given to him. And we have that slap in the movie.
That was like such an iconic moment. And I know you had told me that happens in the pre-episode. Like we talked about it. I was not ready for how great that scene would be. It just seemed like hundreds of years of slavery was like, here's a little retribution for that. A little bit of reparation there. And to have him be slapped in his plantation home or garden or whatever with all of his workers and everything there in the area. I guess they weren't like present for it except for his manservant, I guess. It was very satisfying, I guess. Yeah. To see that. And then to see the white guy, I can't remember his name now.
Endicott.
To see his reaction to that.
You saw that. And then the chief is like, yeah, I did. And doesn't know what to do either. Yeah. What are you going to do about
There's no context for this.
I don't know. I've never seen such a thing before.
So it was very satisfying to see that. And then to also see Endicott's reaction when he's alone too. Because I'm sure he like had never experienced that. And it seemed like true emotion.
Like right when they leave?
Yeah.
What did you see on him? What kind of reaction did he give? Because I actually don't remember what his face was like. I was looking at the servant.
Oh, so he looks like he's about to cry.
Kind of like realizing like, oh, the times are a-changing. Oh, shit.
So I was thinking about this actually yesterday. And I thought he's one of two things. I thought he's either crying because he's realizing that it's not the good old days of the South anymore, which were not good at all. Or he's crying because nobody's ever hit him before.
Yeah.
One, because he's like a rich plantation owner. And also that he's like, his feelings are hurt because the chief of police didn't back him up. He backed Tibbs up. And so he's like a little bit of that like playground, like, but you're supposed to be my friend kind of moment. And so like either way, it's very well done. But I was like really surprised to see that we got the emotion after the fact, because I feel like a lot of movies don't show what happens in those last few moments of an interaction like that, of like the emotions that surge. It's like when a kid falls down and they cry, and then it's mostly because they were scared, but you still have that like big burst of emotion.
Well, I think it might be the case here too.
Yeah.
I think he's scared.
Absolutely. And so I really like this scene because of the way that they handled it all the way through.
The editing of this movie, I really appreciate. And I know a lot of it is dated now because it is much slower than a lot of current movies. And things like the zooms. Yeah. Zoom lenses being relatively new at this point, and they seemed a little too zoom happy at points. And because they are correcting for things that they just couldn't do otherwise. Mm-hmm. So they have to overcome a lot. And of course, this is also for the time, a pretty low budget movie. So a lot of it looks like 70s TV more than it does some other big,
I could see that,
like 60s and 70s films. But I still really liked the editing. And I think it's choices like that, or like when we get the smash cut to the thresher just before that, and we get to see the people working in the fields. The editing in this movie is able to do its own job at conveying the messages of the movie. I forget who the editor was now, but it is someone who does great work and who went on to be a very good director in their own right. And I feel bad for forgetting them now, but I'm not a film historian. Maybe we could talk about some other technical aspects as well. One thing that was also revolutionary about this movie was the cinematography. Specifically, this was arguably the first time ever that a cinematographer made special considerations for how to light Black people.
Yeah, because that's like a totally different thing.
That had never been a consideration. Yeah. And still in movies and TV today, you see people who are not good at it. They don't realize that it is different. And he is pioneering some techniques that are still used today. Never mind. I was going to say, here's what I like to do and talk about filters and stuff. Nobody cares. But he cared. Right. That was something that people hadn't done. And I think so much of the movie benefits from that, right? His name was Haskell Wexler, which is a great name. That's a good name, yeah. And went on to do cinematography for lots of classic big giant movies. But in this one, the fact that you could see Poitier's face, and he's a dark-skinned man, that you could see it and it not just all be glare. Because in a lot of movies, when you see Black people, they're either completely in shadow or you can see harsh glare on them. Right. Because they're just blasting.
They just have no facial definition.
Yeah. And because of Poitier's performance, so much of it was in silence. So much was
facial expressions.
those, and especially subtle facial expressions. Like in the very beginning, there was that scene I was talking about where he is being arrested and he has his hands up on the wall. And I think the shot is from underneath his hands almost. Yeah. And you get to see his face. And it has a harsh glare outline on one side. And then you get to still see his eyes on the other side. And you get to see, that's the point where I was talking about that I saw this seething rage underneath, but still having it all be contained. And that, of course, is to Poitier's credit because he's able to do that with his facial expressions. But that's also to Wexler's credit because had this been shot by someone else, I think all of that would have been lost. Because you see other movies like that where that sort of thing is lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I did kind of notice, and I mean, obviously, I don't have your eye for movies and lighting and filters and photo stuff, but it's definitely something that I noticed, that the skin tones seemed very pronounced and like well lit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about as technical as I get. Because
But you could see him.
you can
That's
see
what
him,
matters.
and it also goes the other way when they are trying to light sometimes darker skin tones. All of the lighter skin tones tend to be like just sheets. Like it's so bright, and I feel like that's also a very specific skill that I'm sure. What's his name? Wexler. Did, but it's really interesting to see this early in film that done so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, like, it took this long.
Yeah.
So it's like
right?
it's like both, right?
Yeah.
That like, wait, we should light different colored skinned people differently?
Yeah, absolutely.
It took a long time for them to figure that out.
Yeah. I feel like even in our first day of our wedding photos, when we got some sneak peeks, you gave the photographer some tips on that.
Yeah.
Because I
can't
looked
light
so pale.
Both of us the same way.
I didn't look like I had any blood in my body in a few of those photos. But yeah, so
and then even I looked like I had like porcelain skin.
Yeah, like
because I think so many people want to lighten skin because they think that is, well, everyone wants to be lighter, right?
Yeah.
But no, I just want to look like what I look like.
I just want to look like I look like with nice makeup on. that was my goal. But yeah, that was something that I hadn't really thought about until then. So I think it's a very cool thing to see done well in 1957. 67, sorry.
And then there is the score, which maybe doesn't seem like anything special to us now, but this was the first time, at least the first time in any big budget, well, I guess this wasn't big budget, in popular cinema, that the score had its base in American music, in the blues and in jazz a little bit. It had always been your classic big orchestral scores before this.
Right.
And we watch movies from like the mid 60s now, and you're like, why does this have like a full symphony behind it? It seems odd.
It's too much.
And to have a movie taking place in small town Mississippi, if it had a full orchestral score, it would seem very out of place.
Mm-hmm.
So this was done by Quincy Jones, who is, if you don't know, just a musical genius who has, I don't know how many Emmys and Oscars and all of that, but so many, and just like made great music. I love a lot of Quincy Jones stuff from the early 70s especially.
Quincy Jones, so like I don't know a lot from the 60s and 70s, but Quincy Jones is one of the people that I definitely know.
Yeah, he's big. We're not going to get all into Quincy Jones.
He's a name that I know.
But they approached him and he decided to take his cues from American blues music because it's a movie that's taking place in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I give it a big orchestral score? And that's why he was chosen, of course, as well. And then we have the theme song, which I love a movie where they have a theme song with the title in the first 5 seconds of it. And a great song by Ray Charles, who is a Southerner himself. I'm not sure if Quincy Jones is. So that was shocking. I heard stories about the first time this was screened and the music came on that the audience started laughing because they're like, what is this? Why is there like blues music in a movie? Because it had never been done to not have your classical kind of European influenced score.
Quincy Jones was born in Chicago.
Not Southern at all. Do you have any other things you liked about this movie or noticed?
One thing that I didn't like, can we talk about the gum chewing?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Oh my God. I hate any sort of like eating or chewing noise. That's just like, it makes my skin crawl. So that in the first like 20 minutes of the movie, I was having a hard time like focusing on what was happening because he was chewing so obnoxiously. And then I was like, if this was now, it would be leading to some sort of joke or confrontation, right? Like something would have to be said about this like guy chewing gum like that in a movie. And then it just never came up.
Did it bother you less as the movie went on?
I was able to like ignore it a little bit more.
I wonder if it was done with less intensity as the movie went on.
Maybe.
Because the word you used was obnoxious.
Yeah.
And I think that is very intentional, right?
Right.
It is supposed to be. This is a man who has probably too much confidence, has never been knocked down a peg.
All the power.
And maybe we should talk about his character now, since this is a good segue into it. I think the gum chewing, I heard that he didn't want to do it. He's like, I don't chew gum. This is dumb. And then he started to use it as a prop.
Right.
And the speed of his chewing was kind of an insight into his character's emotions at the time.
Right.
And I don't remember it later on. And I'm not sure if that's because I became used to it or if it's because as he started to not like, maybe in respect's too hard, but sure, respect Tibbs a little more. He began taking up less space in the movie and in the world that he was in himself.
Mm-hmm. Huh.
Maybe that's it.
Interesting. Yeah, I did, like, it was so overwhelming at the beginning that, I was having trouble, like, following the plot of the movie because I was like,
Shut up.
Oh my God. Someone needs to just like, I just wanted to do the like thing that we used to do before nap time when I was a preschool teacher, and you do the like mouth swipe to make sure that there's no like food left in there.
Swipe that gum out.
So that they don't like choke while they're sleeping. I just wanted to go and do that to the police officer and get that piece of gum out of there.
On the DVD, I watched this little kind of 15-minute making of, and they kept track. And I don't know the number off the top of my head now, but I think it was something like he went through 257 packs of gum in the filming of this movie.
The gum budget in this movie.
That's where all the money went.
Out of control.
It was a $2 million budget, $1 million on gum.
On gum. Wild.
So his character, Chief Gillespie, upon my first watch, I think I didn't appreciate the nuance of it nearly as much as I did this time. Because I think I was watching for Poitier, right? Because to me, he's the big name. Of course, Steiger did win the Oscar for Best Actor for this.
Right.
And this did win Best Picture in 1967 as well.
Oh.
But his character, Gillespie, do you think he changes? And do you think he gets to the point where you or Tibbs like him?
No.
Do you think he changes at all?
I think he changes to the point where he kind of acknowledges, and I think it's a little bit misguided, I think he acknowledges that Tibbs is maybe like an equal in police terms. Like, I'm not saying that he had like a full, like, racially led like epiphany of like, oh, everybody's equal. I mean, like, this man knows his police work, and I think that the chief thinks that he knows just as much as Tibbs, and that they are like not equals but like able to do the same job.
There's some sort of mutual respect.
Yeah. And I think that that's like a little misguided because like obviously Tibbs is the smartest person and he's so much smarter than everybody else in this movie.
Right.
And you can like see it. It's painfully obvious to everybody but the people in this movie. And I think that the police chief kind of respects him a little bit more by the end of the movie. And I think that, like I said, it's like a little bit misguided because he's like they're not equals. But it's really interesting to see his kind of a move towards protecting Tibbs towards the end of the movie, and a little bit more of like a let him do his work because he's getting the job done kind of attitude towards Tibbs.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that in talking about this movie and other movies that have followed suit of having similar themes, everyone's like, he met this great black guy and that cured his racism.
No.
That's not the case. And I like that that's not the case. I think that is to the credit of the subtlety of the writing of this movie. Like, maybe he is just the least evil of the evil characters. Yeah. But I think he is still meant to be seen as a bad guy.
Yeah.
That's how I took it. Don't forget, towards the end of this movie, he comes across like 4 guys who are trying to actively murder Tibbs.
Yes.
And what does he tell them? Does he arrest them or do anything like that? He says, like, get on now, you hear?
Go on home.
That's it.
That's it.
Just go on home. So although I think this movie does show him begrudgingly give some respect to Tibbs, I don't believe that this character is fundamentally changed and will extend that respect to Black people.
Right.
I think he's actually like a pretty good cop, Gillespie. Again, low bar, very low bar.
Of course, yeah.
Because in a lot of other people in this movie would have just shot and locked up Tibbs right at the beginning.
Right.
One of those two.
Yeah.
Shot him or locked him up. He does make those assumptions, but he is a good enough cop that he is willing to listen and to learn, which is surprising. Like, none of these people, I think, are played as like racist caricatures. I believe all of them are racist. Every white person in this movie seems pretty racist.
Yeah.
I would say maybe him least of them. I think that the best we can hope for Gillespie is if someone else is murdered and he sees a Black person, he's not going to bring them in without questioning. He will still assume it was them, but he will ask the questions now.
Right.
I think it is a tiny step, but for him, a very big step.
Yeah.
So I like that the movie doesn't say like, hey, racism cured. All it is take care of yourself, you hear?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
He has respect for this one man. And the movie, I don't know if the movie's saying is like, that's all we can hope for, but it is setting up a maybe a more realistic goal for a lot of people.
Yeah. It's an interesting kind of conundrum.
There were other movies about race relations in the South before this movie, but they would tend to center on the white character who is dealing with this changing world around them. And they often dealt with Southern kind of confusion about how things are different now and how that's the effect it's having on how they live their lives. And rarely did we ever see how the lives of the Black people were changed or different. But here we get a bit of both. And I wonder if he won his Oscar because people are like, look, this is a shining beacon of how you can change.
Yeah.
I think Steiger knew through this performance that that's not what he was doing. He was playing it small. And earlier on in the movie, I think he was more open because he was trying to be a good cop. And he is actually kind of an outsider in this world as well. Because we get to hear that he's pretty new to this job. He doesn't seem like he's one of the gang. Like one of the other cops are like laughing behind his back and stuff. So he is a bit of an outsider as well. Of course, not nearly as much as Tibbs or Mrs. Colbert.
Yeah.
But next for being an outsider would probably be him. So that gives him, he doesn't exactly have one foot in each world, but he is at least willing to hear from another part of the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which isn't something that everyone else is willing to do. He's just a guy.
Yeah.
You know, don't get me wrong. I think he is very racist and will remain that way after this movie. But he is willing to listen and he is willing to be patient. But all of those are if it is in serving him.
Yeah.
He's not doing it out of any sort of compassion. But if it helps him do his job, then he is willing to get over racism.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how I put it.
I think that's a really good way to see it.
But he's still kind of a dick.
Yeah. And that gum chewing.
And that gum chewing.
You'll never forgive him for that.
And we get very few other Black people in this movie.
Yeah.
I think it's just the cotton pickers.
Yeah.
The servant at Endicott's and the mechanic, right? And his family.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in each case that they show Black people, they are all people who are kind of keeping this society running, even though behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Because Endicott is the richest guy in town who owns everything and is so powerful, and it's because of his cotton plantation.
Yeah.
The mechanic is literally keeping things running. And then, of course, Endicott's servant as well. Oh, and then there's the what's her name? Mama something, who performs abortions. When white people need something, where do they go? They're going to her.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's also keeping things running.
Mama Khaliba.
That actress usually plays like a very proper woman, and does in she plays Poitier's mom in something.
Oh,
I can't remember what it is. Maybe it was the same year. Was it Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Anyway, something.
yes, she was in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
So she played his mom in the same year. That's kind of fun. The film never comes out and says it, but maybe they're kind of saying that America and its institutions were built on the backs of Black people, but they would remain uncredited, just like everyone in this.
Yeah. I feel like there should have been a few more Black characters. I understand that, like, back then that there wouldn't have been in a movie like this because they're already having like a leading actor. And I just think that like it would have been nice to see a few more just glimpses into what life as a Black person in this town in Sparta would be like, just for context, I guess. I think that would have been nice.
And I wonder if it was conscious in that line when they are going past the cotton fields and he goes, "None of that for you, eh, Virgil?"
Yeah.
And that's like a shot at both that you are an outsider from what Gillespie says at some point. It's like, these are your people. We're going to give jobs to colored people, to your people. And he's like, those aren't my people. I am not here. We are all not the same. I wonder if that is something that had been put in once Poitier had been cast, because like I was saying, how he always had to be the ideal Black man in all of his roles, and he was seen as an other from this, like, from the working class, right? Mm-hmm. And they are kind of addressing that in this movie, which had not happened in other movies I'd seen of his.
Yeah.
A lot of layers and nuance to this movie in the context that I cannot be privy to from, being born in the 80s. I just don't know about all of that. And I don't know nearly as much about Poitier's career, but this movie just seems like such a milestone in so many ways, both in his career and in all those things that we talked about in the portrayal of Black people on screen. Mm-hmm. So that is why I picked this for my Black History Month movie.
I think it's a very important movie, and I think that people should watch it just to understand what it was like back then.
And also a pretty solid, pretty fun police procedural.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you know who did it early on?
No.
Some of that
I also
is
wasn't
not
trying to guess.
So I was saying that I'd watched it just last year, and when you said like, "Oh, who did it?" and we were just kind of like joking around, I honestly didn't remember, because that's not important about this movie.
No, and that's the thing. It's like the last 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
But like by the end of the movie, I was so kind of enthralled by the story and the like race in this movie and the kind of subtext that I'd kind of forgotten that someone had been murdered and that they were like, the whole point was they were solving a murder.
Yeah, the point of the movie is Gillespie and Tibbs's relationship.
Yeah.
That is what I remember. And just Tibbs in this kind of fish out of water story. That's the important part of this movie. And I wonder if they had made the murder somehow related to those themes. Would that have made the movie stronger? Or is it better that their relationship can exist outside of that, and they don't have external things outside of just the pre-existing world? If the murder was like, oh, it was done by a Black person, or like, oh, it was done by a white person who was upset about their racist tradition or something like that, I think that maybe would have been too much, and allowing mostly just these two men to work it all out maybe was better than having the movie also add in through the crime. I kind of like that the crime was just like, oh yeah, it's just a thing for money that just kind of
just happened.
Yeah, and then it was because of this 16-year-old got pregnant, and like that's nothing to do with anything really.
Yeah, that was interesting, and I almost feel like we could have done without learning who killed them.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter. No. It wasn't an important part of the plot. And yeah, I kind of actually had forgotten that that's how everything like worked out.
It is funny that you can say who committed the murder in this murder mystery is not an important part of the plot.
Yeah.
And it's not really. It's not important to the overall theme and importance of this movie.
Yeah. And as somebody who loves a mystery, twisty turny thriller, I find myself very surprised that I don't care as much about who did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't really matter to me. Yeah.
All right. Well, join us again next week where I think we are going to do our first rebroadcast.
Yes. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we now have 251 episodes under our belt. And I think, or 252, I guess. Anyway, numbers, who needs them? But we are going to start bringing back some of the movies that we have done previously from our back catalog. And we have a couple movies in the running this week. Indy, do you know what movie we're going to be re-releasing?
Well, I think we should go all the way back to our first Black History Month movie and episode 40.
Wow.
From February 17th of 2020. Let's re-release our episode on Do the Right Thing, the 1989, I say, Spike Lee classic.
Yeah, wow. That was only episode 40?
Yeah.
I feel like we did that so much more recently, but yeah, I'm excited to go back to that one.
I haven't listened to the episode since then, so let's listen to that and watch Do the Right Thing. We're not going to do the whole pre-episode thing. We'll just release that next week.
Excellent.
Go watch Do the Right Thing. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
It's available to watch so many different places. And looking at the show notes here, this is back when we would do Beer of the Week.
Oh my goodness.
We would have a beer every episode, and I kind of stopped drinking.
You did.
I ruined it for us.
Yeah.
But the beer of the week that week was Brewster's Hawaiian Coconut Porter.
Oh, classic.
We talked about, in the notes, for some reason, I have David O. Russell yelling at Lily Tomlin on the set of I Heart Huckabees. I don't know why that came up.
Interesting.
Some scenes from Night of the Hunter. I know why that came up. And we talked about Public Enemy. We talked about how things are still painfully present in our everyday life. And this was February of 2020.
Ooh.
So some shit was going down.
It was, yes.
So let's listen to that next week. Watch that movie. And
we'll be back the week after with a new theme and a new set of Things of the Fortnight.
Y'all come back now, you hear?
Bye.
Goal for a lot of people?
Yeah.